The Threxan Hegemony had long since conquered the stars. The Empire, a behemoth stretching across hundreds of thousands of systems, had grown accustomed to its dominance. Its bureaucratic stranglehold reached deep into the furthest reaches of the galaxy. To most species, the hegemony represented stability, order, and control. But for the Threxans themselves, their greatest strength, an iron grip over the cosmos, was starting to feel like a weakness. In the farthest quadrant of the galaxy, beyond even the furthest territories the Threxans had conquered, lay a small, almost insignificant spiral arm. It had been relegated to a low priority on every galactic map, tucked away in the deep black, a place few had ever thought to explore. The territory was dotted with stars too dim to warrant attention, and the planets were too distant to influence anything meaningful. Still, an exploration vessel, the Vessel of the Starlight, was tasked with charting this far-off section as part of an ongoing initiative to map every corner of the universe. Captain Zirak of the Threxan Hegemony watched the data stream across her console. She had seen hundreds of these reports, but the readings of this spiral arm were particularly unremarkable. It wasn't even worth commenting on, but it was a mandate, and Zirak was known for doing her job thoroughly. As the captain of this vessel, she led the expedition into this forgotten corner of space. No fanfare, no urgent need. The moment she first laid eyes on the planet they would later come to know as Earth, there was nothing particularly awe-inspiring about it. The planet was mostly covered in vast oceans, with a scattering of continents that looked chaotic, yet somehow familiar. Its atmosphere was thick, tainted with pollutants, hardly a place one would expect to encounter an advanced civilization, let alone anything noteworthy. First assessment, Captain, her communications officer said, bringing her out of her reverie. Unimpressive, Zirak replied, almost absent-mindedly. She didn't need to give much more than that. It was another unremarkable planet in a galaxy full of unremarkable worlds. She'd seen dozens of planets just like it. It wasn't even on any of the critical maps. Should we proceed with contact? The officer asked. Let's mark it. Low priority, Zirak said. Set observer status. Nothing to see here. The Vessel of the Starlight continued its course, and Earth remained just one more insignificant world, awaiting its place in the endless catalog of the Threxan Empire's conquests. It was filed away as an afterthought, somewhere between the colossal gas giants and the barren moons, barely mentioned in any intergalactic document. Back on Earth, life continued at its usual pace. The planet had long since entered the stage of industrial development, and the species known as humans had reached a level of technological sophistication that allowed them to dominate their own world. They had sent probes to the stars, though these were mostly ignored by other galactic empires, dismissed as insignificant by the higher civilizations. The leaders of the world, governments, corporations, and organizations, had no idea that the galaxy was watching them. If anything, their greatest concern was the petty squabbles among themselves. They did not yet grasp the weight of what had just transpired. They didn't know about the Threxans, the galactic giants who had just cataloged Earth as little more than a rock in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. Earth's place in the cosmic order was irrelevant. It was a few weeks later when the Threxan scouts, on their way back through this obscure arm of the galaxy, received their first unusual reports. The system around Earth had remained quiet, almost too quiet, but an odd signal was picked up. A strange transmission was sent from one of the lesser moons orbiting Earth's planet, picked up only because the exploration vessel had been traveling through that sector on its way to other destinations. Captain Zirak received the report with an eyebrow raised. It wasn't unusual for civilizations to try sending signals into space, but this one was different. It was a form of communication, yes, but it wasn't organized or structured in a way that matched any advanced species she knew. The humans were attempting something far simpler, a method of contact that was primitive in nature, an attempt to reach the stars, but in a way that felt desperate. It piqued her curiosity for a moment. Send a team to investigate, she ordered, half-heartedly. There was no danger in these messages. She was certain of it. No threat to the Empire. She was merely humoring the process. The Threxans had far more important matters to deal with elsewhere. But there was something about the message that felt oddly familiar. Not in content, but in tone. As Zirak walked into the small communication room aboard the vessel of the Starlight, she watched the technician decode the transmission. The message was a simple, repeating pattern of radio waves, a mathematical structure that seemed chaotic, almost nonsensical. But as the team worked through the noise, something clearer emerged. A series of coordinates, a request for contact, and a fragment of a human phrase. "Can you hear us?" For a moment, Zirak froze. There was something about the simplicity of the message that struck her as almost human. It wasn't sophisticated. It wasn't full of data or elaborate protocols. It wasn't what one would expect from a civilization that was considered backward in the eyes of the galactic community. Her thoughts were interrupted when the transmission cut off, replaced by static. Zirak's eyes narrowed. It was a small thing, a tiny flicker in the great expanse of the galaxy. But for the first time, she wondered if this insignificant planet might be more than it seemed. And so it began. Earth, marked as a backwater, a low-priority world in the grand scheme of the hegemony, began to stir. The Threxans had no idea what would unfold, no inkling of the revolution that was quietly taking root across the galaxy. But everything, in time, would change. The galaxy had begun to turn, and the heart of the galaxy would soon beat to a new rhythm. The hegemony had always prided itself on its invulnerability. After all, when your empire stretched across entire star systems and your bureaucracy controlled every facet of galactic life, what was there to fear? But like any colossal structure, the Threxan Empire was only as stable as its weakest link. And, as the year passed, those links were starting to rust. Far from the quiet hum of the vessel of the Starlight and its routine exploration, the heart of the Empire was slowly collapsing under its own weight. The distant corners of the hegemony, the outer colonies, had long been neglected, left to govern themselves under the watchful eyes of imperial governors who barely understood the cultures they were meant to rule. The further you got from the imperial capital, the more fragile the empire's hold became. Zirak had returned to her administrative duties after her brief investigation of Earth. Her curiosity about the primitive species had faded, swallowed by the larger, more pressing matters that occupied her thoughts. The cracks within the Empire were impossible to ignore. The rebellions in the border systems were growing more frequent, and the Central Command seemed to be losing its ability to respond. Resources were running thin, and bureaucratic inefficiency had reached new heights. In the more remote worlds, entire fleets had been stranded without proper resupply, their crews growing restless and rebellious. Despite the best efforts of the imperial leadership, the hegemony was beginning to falter. Zirak sat in her sleek, angular command chair aboard the Starlight's bridge, her mind preoccupied with the latest reports from the outer sectors. The chaos was beginning to spread. "Captain," her first officer, Cormac, said, pulling Zirak from a reverie. "Another colony in the Outer Ring has declared independence. This time, it's on the planet Torn 4. They've cut off all communications and are organizing resistance forces." Zirak sighed. Torn 4. Of course. I had a feeling this would happen. They were always a disorganized bunch. Is there any hope of negotiating with them? We've already tried. They're requesting a full withdrawal of Imperial forces, or they threaten to escalate. It's not just Torn 4 anymore. There are signs of similar movements on Althera, Darret, and Rishon. It's spreading. Let me guess. No reinforcements available, Zirak remarked dryly. None. The fleets are stretched thin. The further we reach, the more resources we lose. We have our hands full just keeping the core system stable. It's the same story across the board. We're on the verge of a full collapse in the outer systems, Captain. If we don't respond soon, we might lose them permanently. Zirak leaned back in her chair, staring at the star map displayed in front of her. The once pristine lines and coordinates had begun to fray, each rebellion marking a disruption in the otherwise calculated symmetry of the Empire. Each world had once been a piece of a vast, orderly puzzle. Now, those pieces were slipping out of place. "What about Earth?" she asked, the words slipping from her lips without much thought. The human colony, so insignificant on the scale of the galaxy, suddenly felt like a fleeting curiosity. It seemed irrelevant in the context of a dying empire, but something about the planet had lingered in the back of her mind. A nagging feeling that wouldn't quite go away. Cormac looked at her, then at the communication screen. Earth is still under observation, but there's no sign of rebellion there, Captain. In fact, reports suggest that Earth's standing with the surrounding systems is, surprisingly, stable. Their diplomatic missions are growing in number, and some of the outer systems are starting to prefer their methods over ours. Zirak gave a short, dismissive laugh. Please, Earth's methods are nothing but an unorganized mess. How could diplomacy based on disarray possibly be more effective than our carefully constructed order? Cormac was quiet for a moment, then said, perhaps because, Captain, the systems on the edge of the Empire are more like Earth than we care to admit. Maybe they're looking for something different. We've grown complacent with control, but the further we stretch, the more we lose. And Earth's chaotic methods, they seem to work in ways we don't understand. Zirak narrowed her eyes, suddenly more alert. You're saying humans are somehow better at this? More capable of managing rebellion? Not better, Captain, Cormac replied. Different, more adaptable, and, strangely, more effective. Zirak was about to dismiss the idea outright, but a voice in her head stopped her. She had seen herself, in the brief moments when her curiosity about Earth had peaked. She had observed the human signals, the odd, chaotic transmission. Perhaps there was something to Cormac's words after all. She couldn't afford to ignore it. On Earth, far removed from the intrigues of galactic politics, the human population was unaware of the monumental changes slowly happening just beyond the stars. But the world was changing in its own ways. Nations that once fought over land, resources, and ideology were beginning to unify under common banners, seeking stability in a tumultuous age. The rise of new technologies, particularly in communications and renewable energy, was rapidly altering the world's balance. Yet, even as Earth seemed to stabilize, something deep within the Threxan Empire was beginning to shift. Earth, still considered an observer world, had become a symbol for something more profound, a testament to adaptability, to resilience. Where the imperial bureaucracy failed, humanity's messiness, creativity, and sheer determination were filling the gap. The human experiment was still in its infancy, but already there was a sense of something larger at play. Small, autonomous alliances were emerging between previously isolated planets and stations. While Earth's influence was minimal at best, it had begun to spread in subtle ways, through trade, through information exchange, and, most of all, through the surprising successes of human settlements in the outer systems. As the Threxans struggled to maintain order at home, the unexpected rise of these fringe worlds was beginning to attract attention, not for their military power, but for their unique ability to survive and even thrive in the midst of galactic chaos. And all of this, Zirak realized, was happening without their knowledge. Back in the depths of the Threxan capital, the once unstoppable empire now seemed uncertain. Power was slipping away, but the empire could not see the extent of it, not yet. The cracks in the system were growing larger. It would only be a matter of time before the fractures reached the heart of the hegemony. The unexpected success of Earth's colonies, growing at a pace never anticipated, had begun to challenge everything the Threxans thought they knew about the galaxy. The empires of the galaxy were fractured, but one truth stood out among them all. Earth was still standing, and it was perhaps the only force with the potential to hold the galaxy together. It had been a slow burn at first, the subtle rise of Earth's influence on the galactic stage. For a long time, the Threxan hegemony had written it off as an anomaly, a passing curiosity. The humans, despite their unrefined technology and chaotic methods, had somehow become a stabilizing force on the fringes of the galaxy. It was a phenomenon no one could quite explain, not even the humans themselves. And yet, it was happening. Earth's colonies, once isolated and small, had begun to flourish. The sheer adaptability of human culture, a cocktail of optimism and desperation, had fueled a new kind of diplomacy. While the Threxans employed cold, calculated bureaucracy to maintain order, Earth's representatives relied on a different approach: negotiation through human connection. The first hint that this was more than a fluke came from the planet Rishon, located in a distant system that had once been a hotbed of pirate activity and political unrest. Earth had been sending civilian delegates, most of them diplomats and engineers, to Rishon for years, working to establish trade agreements. At first, their work was seen as little more than charity. Human technology was crude compared to the advanced systems employed by the Threxans, but it was adaptable, and that adaptability was what made it work. Rishon's leadership had been hostile toward all outside interference. They'd resisted every offer of support from the hegemony, and their territory had been under constant siege by the pirates that plagued the outer systems. But then, something changed. The Rishons, desperate for a solution, agreed to meet with human diplomats, despite their mistrust. The humans didn't offer any grand solutions or promises. They didn't come with massive fleets or even advanced technology. Instead, they simply listened. They understood the problems in a way that the Threxans never had. They empathized. And in the end, it wasn't technology or might that turned the tide. It was the humans' willingness to adapt, to build relationships, to offer pragmatic, often unorthodox solutions that worked in the moment. Over time, the Rishons began to prefer Earth's approach. They slowly rejected the Threxan oversight and sided with humanity in a series of trade and peace agreements. Other colonies began to take note. Word spread that where humans went, systems stabilized, tensions eased, and even pirates had begun to lose their grip. At first, the Threxans dismissed it as a fluke. Surely, they reasoned, these systems were simply tired of conflict and chaos. But as more and more planets chose to align themselves with Earth, the Threxans began to notice something strange, a pattern. Human diplomats were gaining influence, and they were doing so without the military might or economic power that the Threxans had long relied on. They weren't offering subjugation or control. They were offering something simpler: mutual respect. The humans were accepting the natural chaos of the galaxy and finding ways to work with it, not against it. On Earth, no one noticed the shift at first. Life went on, as usual. Political leaders argued over domestic issues. Scientists worked on new technologies, and engineers built ever more efficient systems. But beneath the surface, a quiet revolution was taking place. As more human-led settlements began to thrive, more systems sought out Earth's influence. The United Earth government began to establish semi-official diplomatic ties with systems that had once been considered too far-flung or dangerous. A new kind of galactic network was forming, one where the most important currency wasn't military power or economic might, but cooperation. Dr. Anya Lee, one of Earth's leading diplomats in the outer systems, was the one who first realized what was happening. She had spent years working on the Rishon Initiative and had seen firsthand the remarkable transformation that had taken place there. She had expected more resistance, but instead, she had found willing allies. Her mission to Rishon had ended in a formal agreement, and, as she returned to Earth, she began to notice the ripple effect across the galaxy. Anya, her colleague, Captain Lucius Ramos, said as he joined her in her office at the Earth Department of Intergalactic Relations, "I'm getting reports from the outer systems. More and more of these independent worlds are starting to reach out to us. They want us to lead, well, maybe not lead, but guide them. They want to do things the way we've done it on Earth." Anya looked up, a slight frown on her face. "I've seen the same reports. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but now I'm not so sure. I think we're building something bigger here. Something unexpected. Humans have always adapted, but this is different. They're not just using us for trade or technology, they're trusting us. They're asking us to help them govern." "It's not just Rishon," Lucius continued. "I've been hearing similar things from others. Varia, Torin, even Kelvis. It's like our method, our approach, is contagious. And not just our tech, but how we deal with each other, how we manage our worlds. They're seeing us as an example of something that works. Anya leaned back in her chair, thinking, it's a strange thing, isn't it? The more we offer our solutions, the more we become the answer. But I can't help wondering, are we just bandaging a problem that's too big for us to fix? We're building something fragile. I can feel it. Lucius smiled faintly. Perhaps. But it's working, Anya. The systems are starting to stabilize, and we're being asked to guide them. Not as conquerors, but as partners. That's something the Threxans will never understand. Anya looked out the window, her mind racing. The Threxan Hegemony, with its iron fist and rigid bureaucracy, had been the dominant force in the galaxy for centuries. The idea that Earth, a species once considered an afterthought, could rise to challenge that dominance, without firing a single shot, was almost absurd. And yet it was happening. Maybe this is the future, she said quietly, more to herself than to Lucius. A galaxy where we don't impose our will, but help each other. A galaxy that can find common ground without violence. I just hope we can handle it. As the months passed, Earth's influence continued to grow. Diplomacy, once an afterthought, had become Earth's greatest asset. Slowly but surely, more systems came to see Earth not as a backwater, but as a hub of innovation, stability, and connection. And though the Threxan Hegemony still held the reins of the galaxy's empire, its grip was loosening. The galaxy, it seemed, was evolving beyond their control, and the human presence, once insignificant, was becoming the cornerstone of a new order. In the dimly lit command room of the Threxan capital, a single projection flickered to life on the wall. The star maps, once neat and orderly, now seemed less certain, less stable. Captain Zirak stood before them, studying the shifting patterns with narrowed eyes. Another system has defected, Cormac reported, his voice cold. This time, it's Korthia, a vital trade route for our outer colonies. They formally pledged their allegiance to Earth. Zirak didn't respond immediately. Her thoughts were elsewhere, flickering back to that transmission from Earth, the strange message that had almost slipped through unnoticed. At the time, she had dismissed it, chalking it up to some insignificant signal from a primitive world. Now, with every passing day, Earth's influence seemed to grow. Korthia, Zirak repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Why? Korthia was a stable system, with more resources than we could ever dream of. They had no reason to revolt. We've been trying to figure that out, Cormac said, pointing at the data displayed on the wall. At first, it was just trade agreements. Earth offered better terms, more favorable diplomatic conditions. But now, it's a full alliance. Korthia's leadership, once loyal to the hegemony, is now openly supporting Earth's methods. They've sent an envoy to Earth to formalize their new relationship. Zirak turned her back on the projections, running a hand through her hair in frustration. This isn't supposed to happen. The Empire is in control. No one can. Cormac's voice cut through her thoughts. I think we're missing something. This isn't just about resources or trade. It's something else. Earth's influence, their methods, they're working. These worlds are thriving in ways we never predicted. Systems that were once teetering on the edge of collapse are now seeing growth. Korthia is the latest example, but we're hearing similar reports from worlds like Varia, Torin, and Rishon. Zirak turned back to face him, her eyes narrowing. Threxans have dominated the galaxy for centuries. We have crushed rebellions, brokered peace treaties, and outlasted every challenger. How is it that a primitive species like humans are suddenly becoming the center of attention? I think it's their unpredictability, Cormac said. Their adaptability. They don't have the same rigid structures we rely on. They don't stick to the rules. They bend them. It's like they're offering solutions where none existed before. Zirak was silent for a long moment, her mind racing. So what now? We can't just let them keep spreading this effect, this so-called human solution. If we allow this to continue, we risk losing everything. We can't stop it by force, Cormac replied. Not anymore. These systems are aligning with Earth, not through military conquest, but through diplomacy. They've embraced human methods, and they're thriving. I think that's what's attracting the others. Zirak sighed, running her fingers along the edge of the control panel. She had been watching Earth's progress from afar, not paying enough attention. It had seemed like a minor, inconsequential phenomenon. But the pieces were falling into place now. The more Earth's colonies grew, the more planets were choosing them over the Threxans. A subtle but undeniable shift was happening in the galaxy, and Earth was at its center. Meanwhile, far from the towering halls of Threxan power, on the fringes of a galaxy in flux, Earth's diplomats were feeling the heat of their unexpected success. Anya Lee, now regarded as one of Earth's leading diplomatic figures, stood in a crowded conference room aboard a massive space station. The air was thick with tension. Around her sat representatives from worlds that had once been too distant, too isolated to matter. "The situation has changed," Anya said, her voice steady, despite the sense of urgency in the room. "You are all here because you have chosen to align yourselves with Earth. This is not a decision made lightly, but it is the right one. Together, we can stabilize this region of the galaxy and build a future where we work as equals, not as conquerors." Her words echoed in the chamber, reverberating off the sleek metal walls. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she refused to show it. This was what they had worked for. This was the result of years of diplomacy, of listening, of adapting, of showing these worlds that there was another way. "With all due respect, Ambassador Lee, a representative from the Rishan system, said, what you're proposing isn't simply an alliance. It's a new form of governance, one that lacks the structure we're accustomed to." Anya met his gaze, unflinching. "This is not about governance. It's about cooperation, about mutual respect. Each world has its own history, its own way of life. Our strength lies in recognizing those differences and working together, not forcing one solution on everyone. Humanity's unorthodox methods have worked so far," another delegate from the various systems said, his voice tinged with suspicion. "But how can we trust that this will hold up? You're asking us to stake our future on a loose collection of ideals. What happens when chaos strikes? When we need to make hard decisions?" Anya's eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. "When chaos strikes, we adapt. We have done so on Earth for centuries. Our species has survived and thrived through upheaval. It's not always clean, it's not always pretty, but we find a way forward. Together." There was a long pause, as if the delegates were weighing her words. The tension in the room was palpable, but something else was there too. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a different way to build a galaxy that didn't require conquest, that didn't demand control. And then, one by one, the delegates nodded. A soft murmur of agreement spread across the room, and a sense of unity began to take root. Back in the Threxan capital, Zirak paced restlessly through her quarters. She was still trying to comprehend what was happening. The Empire was losing its grip, and she knew it. Earth, that insignificant planet, had become a catalyst for something much larger, something she didn't fully understand. Her communicator beeped, and she answered it without thinking. "Captain Zirak, we've just received word that the Torrent system has also aligned itself with Earth. They've formally rejected our control and signed a treaty of cooperation with Earth's representative." Cormac's voice came through, tight with disbelief. Zirak felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Torrent was a vital nexus in the outer colonies, its resources key to maintaining the flow of trade. Losing it to Earth was a blow the Empire couldn't afford. "What did I tell you?" Zirak muttered under her breath. "We've underestimated them. We've underestimated Earth." As the message ended, she stood frozen for a moment, her mind spinning. Earth's influence was no longer a distant anomaly. It was becoming the force that defined the future of the galaxy. And the Threxan Hegemony was losing control. The galaxy was moving on, and it was leaving the Empire behind. In the months that followed, Earth's influence continued to spiral outward, quietly yet inexorably. What had begun as an experiment in diplomacy had turned into a full-scale galactic phenomenon. More and more systems, once loyal to the Threxan hegemony, chose to cast their lot with Earth. But it wasn't just diplomacy that was changing the tides. Something deeper was at play, something intangible, something that the Threxans could not grasp. On Earth, the momentum was palpable. The United Earth government had never been a true superpower until now. For centuries, Earth had struggled to find its place in the galactic order, often relegated to the role of observer, the backwater planet that had little to offer. Now, as Earth's influence spread across the stars, it was becoming clear that their greatest asset wasn't technology or wealth. It was something simpler, something more organic. It was their ability to connect. The human approach to governance and diplomacy was fundamentally different from the rigid control of the hegemony. They didn't demand loyalty or subjugation. They fostered cooperation, mutual respect, and dialogue. In a galaxy filled with species that adhered to strict hierarchies and brutal measures of power, Earth's messiness, its willingness to embrace disorder, to listen rather than command, was beginning to seem like a breath of fresh air. But back in the heart of the Threxan Empire, there was no such optimism. Xerax sat at her desk in the command center, staring at the latest reports. The news was grim. Earth's sphere of influence had grown exponentially in the past few months. Every day, new systems declared their allegiance, and now, even some of the core systems were beginning to waver. The tide was turning, and there was nothing she or the Empire could do to stop it. She turned to Cormac, her first officer, who was standing nearby, watching her closely. "Captain," Cormac said, breaking the silence, "I've been reviewing the reports. There's a pattern emerging. Earth's influence isn't just growing, it's expanding organically. We've been trying to understand how they do it. It's not their technology, though that certainly helps. It's something about the way they approach problems. They adapt, they innovate, and they're unafraid of failure." Xerax clenched her fists, her frustration boiling over. "We've known all along that their methods were unorthodox, but they shouldn't have been this effective. How can an empire like ours, an empire that controls thousands of systems, lose to a species like this? We've done everything by the book. Everything." "I think that's the problem, Captain," Cormac replied. "The book isn't working anymore. The galaxy has changed. The outer systems are fractured, and they don't want a regime that operates on cold, calculated control. They're choosing Earth because Earth offers something different, a chance to rebuild, to reinvent themselves." Xerax's eyes narrowed. "So, it's not about control anymore? We're talking about influence through chaos." "It's not chaos, Captain. It's flexibility. It's the ability to adapt quickly to a changing situation. The humans understand that stability isn't always about rigid order. Sometimes it's about navigating the unknown and creating connections with others. That's why their colonies are thriving. They're building relationships, not just control." Xerax slammed her fist onto the desk, her frustration palpable. "The galaxy doesn't need flexibility, Cormac. It needs order. We gave the galaxy order. The Threxan Hegemony brought law to the stars. What happens when that law is no longer respected? We're already seeing it, Captain," Cormac said quietly. "The systems we've lost, they're not doing it out of defiance. They're doing it because they see another way. They don't want to be ruled. They want to work together. They see Earth's model as one that can actually offer that, an inclusive, flexible future. And that's what's pulling them in." Xerax stared at the projections on the wall. Korthia, Rishon, Varia, Torin. The list of worlds that had realigned themselves under Earth's influence continued to grow. The center of power in the galaxy was shifting, and it was shifting toward Earth. It was a shift she had never expected, and certainly never wanted. Meanwhile, on Earth, Anya was holding one of her most important meetings yet. It was a summit with representatives from multiple systems, including those that had once been firmly in the grasp of the Threxans. As Anya stood at the head of the table, she looked around at the various delegates, each representing a different world, a different species, each with their own struggles, but all united by a common desire, a future beyond the oppressive rule of the hegemony. "Today marks an important moment," Anya began, her voice steady but resolute. "We are not here to simply negotiate terms or trade routes. We are here to build something new, a cooperative, interconnected future, one where no species is subjugated, where no world is left behind. The room was filled with murmurs, and Anya could feel the weight of their expectations pressing on her. The stakes had never been higher. We've learned from each other, and we've learned that our diversity is not a weakness. It's our greatest strength. Together, we can form a coalition of systems that works not under the shadow of fear, but in the light of mutual respect. One of the delegates from Varia spoke up, his voice booming in the silence. Earth has shown us a different way. You've given us hope that we can rebuild our systems, recover our resources, and stand together. We are not just looking to Earth for guidance. We are ready to stand with Earth. As equals. Anya smiled, a quiet sense of accomplishment flooding her. She knew this moment would come, but hearing the words spoken aloud made it real. For the first time, Earth wasn't just surviving, it was leading. And not through force, but through understanding and cooperation. But as she looked around the room, she knew that the challenges were only beginning. The galaxy was shifting, yes, but that shift would not go unnoticed by the remaining powers. Earth's success, her success, would not go unanswered. Back on the Threxan capital, Zirac's frustration had turned into something more dangerous, fear. The Threxan Hegemony was losing ground, and they were losing it quickly. The galaxy was no longer a place of certainty. Earth had become a gravitational force, pulling everything toward it, slowly at first, but gaining speed every day. The Empire had always been about control. But what good was control when no one respected you? What good was power when the systems you once commanded no longer answered to you? Captain, Cormac said, drawing Zirac from her thoughts. We've received word from the Central Command. They're calling for a council of the Hegemony's high commanders. The situation is deteriorating faster than anticipated. Earth's influence has reached the core systems. There's talk of a full reassessment of our strategy. Zirac clenched her jaw, her eyes blazing with the fire of a warrior who had lost too many battles to be willing to lose again. It's not over. Not yet. We will not let Earth take what is ours. We're running out of options, Captain, Cormac said, his voice quiet but firm. The galaxy is no longer what it was. We need to adapt. Zirac's gaze hardened. Adapt? We're the Threxan Hegemony. We don't adapt. We conquer, and we will find a way to do it again. But even as she said the words, the doubt began to settle in. Earth wasn't conquering. Earth was creating, building, and uniting in ways that no one could have predicted. The galaxy was changing, and for the first time in centuries, the Threxans were on the outside, looking in. The galaxy had always been a place of power struggles, of brutal wars and cold calculations. The Threxan Hegemony had built its empire on force, an iron fist that brought systems under its rule, held them there through subjugation, and ensured its dominance through fear. But fear, it seemed, was no longer enough. Power, once absolute, was beginning to unravel, slowly at first, then faster, until the empire seemed to be spiraling beyond its control. Zirac stood on the balcony of her quarters, staring out over the sprawling capital. The city was alive with the hum of activity, but beneath the surface, she could feel the tension. The air was thick with uncertainty. The empire had always been a symbol of unyielding strength, but now, it was an empire in decline, grappling with the new reality of a galaxy that was no longer interested in being ruled. Captain, Cormac's voice interrupted her thoughts. We've just received another report. Another system has defected. This time it's Orithar. Zirac turned slowly, her expression hardening. Orithar was a vital system in the central region, one of the last bastions of imperial loyalty in the core worlds. Losing it would be a blow to the very heart of the hegemony. What happened? She demanded, her voice low and controlled. The leadership of Orithar has publicly aligned themselves with Earth. They've pledged their support and signed a formal agreement for cooperation. They've rejected any future allegiance to the hegemony. Zirac's fists clenched. This can't be happening. Not here. Not now. It's happening, Captain, Cormac said quietly. And it's happening everywhere. Earth's sphere of influence is growing, faster than we can keep up with. The core systems are slipping away. Zirak's mind raced. How could this be? The hegemony had controlled the galaxy for centuries. Systems were supposed to obey. They were supposed to fear the might of the Empire. But now, one by one, they were choosing something else. Something unexplainable. Something that had no place in the Empire's calculus of control. She had watched Earth from the beginning, dismissed it as insignificant, a mere backwater in the grand scheme of things. But now it was a force to be reckoned with. Earth's rise was not the result of military conquest or manipulation. It was the result of something far more powerful. Something that the hegemony had never truly understood. The power of cooperation. You said the core systems are slipping away, Zirak said, turning to face Cormac. How many more will follow? How long until the capital itself turns? Cormac hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. There are whispers, Captain. Some of the high commanders are talking about switching allegiances. There's no concrete plan yet, but the momentum is there. Earth is offering an alternative to the order we've built. A chance to reset the balance. And more, it seems like that's what people want. Zirak's heart sank. The empire she had served her entire life, the empire she had sworn to protect, was crumbling. Not from a single military defeat, but from the slow erosion of loyalty, from the collapse of the old systems that had once held everything together. Earth was not winning a war. It was winning hearts and minds. Her mind flashed back to the early days of her investigation into Earth. She had written it off as a triviality, a curious signal that meant nothing. But now, in the wake of everything that had transpired, she couldn't help but wonder if it had all been inevitable. Had the galaxy, had the Threxan hegemony been destined for this? To be replaced by something more fluid, more dynamic, something that could adapt while the Empire clung to its outdated concepts of order and control. Zirak slammed her fist onto the table. What are we supposed to do? We can't stop them like this. We can't fight a war against an idea. Earth has no armies, no fleets. How are we supposed to combat that? The problem, Captain, Cormac said quietly, is that Earth doesn't need an army. They've already won. They've won because they've found a way to connect. They've united people, worlds, systems that were once divided. And now, those same systems are pulling away from the hegemony. Zirak stared at him, disbelief flickering in her eyes. You're saying we've lost because of relationships? Cormac nodded solemnly. It's not just relationships. It's the way they've created trust. They've shown the galaxy that cooperation is possible, without fear, without control. And that, Captain, is something the Threxan hegemony has never understood. Zirak turned away, her face drawn with the weight of the realization. The hegemony had built its empire on control. It had used force, manipulation, and subjugation to bend the galaxy to its will. But now, in the face of Earth's unexpected success, all of that seemed irrelevant. What good was an empire built on fear when the galaxy was looking for something else? Across the galaxy, the change was unmistakable. Systems that had once bowed to the Threxan hegemony were now finding their own paths, uniting under the banner of cooperation. Earth had become the center of a new kind of order, one that didn't rely on dominance, but on partnership. Anjali sat in the conference room aboard the United Earth flagship, her fingers tapping nervously on the surface of the table. The latest reports had confirmed what they had all been dreading. The Threxan hegemony was on the brink of collapse, not from military defeat, but from an ideological shift that no one had seen coming. We've done it, Anya said, her voice a mixture of triumph and disbelief. The galaxy is shifting. Earth's vision is becoming the galaxy's vision. But even as she spoke, a deep unease settled in her chest. Earth had become the center of a new galactic order, and that order was built on cooperation, not conquest. But what would that mean for the future? Could hold? And what would happen when the last few holdouts, those still loyal to the Threxan hegemony, began to resist? The Threxans had always relied on strength and control. They had been the kings of the galaxy for centuries. But the power of the hegemony had been its greatest weakness. When the galaxy grew tired of fear and subjugation, it found something better, something simpler, and Earth had become the embodiment of that hope. As Anya looked out the viewport, watching the stars stretch across the vast expanse, she realized that this was just the beginning. The galaxy had already begun to change, and Earth had become its beating heart. Back on the Threxan capital, Xirax stood in the command center, facing a room full of high-ranking officers. Their once confident faces were now drawn, their eyes filled with a sense of hopelessness that was impossible to ignore. The Empire was in freefall, and no one had the answers. "We failed," Xirax said quietly, her voice hoarse. "The Empire is breaking apart. The galaxy has already moved on." One of the officers, a veteran of countless battles, looked at her with weary eyes. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, Captain. We were the rulers of the galaxy. How do we lose control without firing a single shot?" Xirax stared out at the projection, her gaze fixed on the expanding sphere of Earth's influence. "Because, my friend, the galaxy doesn't want to be ruled anymore. It's not about force. It's about something we've never understood: connection." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a funeral dirge. The galaxy was changing irrevocably. It was no longer the vast, fractured empire that had once been bound together by the cold, relentless grip of the Threxan Hegemony. The empire was still alive in name, its capital still pulsing with the remnants of authority. But the power that had once emanated from that center had already begun to dissipate, slipping through the cracks, drawn towards something new, something unexpected. Earth. Anya stood on the balcony of the United Earth Government's central tower, her eyes tracing the horizon over the sprawling city below. The skyline was aglow with the light of a new era. Earth, the once overlooked backwater planet, had become the fulcrum on which the galaxy now turned. It had no fleet, no military might to speak of, but it had something far more powerful: the ability to unite, to connect, to build bridges where before there had only been walls. In the distance, she could see the rising towers of the new Galactic Assembly Building, where for the first time in history, representatives from dozens of species, many of whom had once been under the heel of the Threxan Hegemony, had gathered. The heart of the galaxy now beat not in the cold, calculating bureaucracy of the Threxans, but in the thriving, unpredictable, messy beauty of humanity's new vision for the stars. The first Galactic Congress had been called to order, and Earth had been chosen as its host. What had once seemed an impossible dream had now become a reality. A galaxy united, not through conquest or subjugation, but through cooperation. "Ambassador," a voice called behind her. Anya turned to see Lucius Ramos, her old friend and colleague, approaching with a solemn look on his face. "It's about to begin." Anya nodded, taking a deep breath. She had worked for this moment her entire life. But even now, standing on the precipice of this new era, a part of her was still unsure. There had been no war, no great battle to win. Earth had not conquered the galaxy. Instead, it had quietly built its influence through understanding, through empathy, through something simpler than the cold, calculated control of the Threxans. "We've done it," she said, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. "We've really done it." Lucius smiled, but there was a trace of sadness in his eyes. "We have, but it's not going to be easy. The hegemony won't just disappear because we've signed a treaty." "I know," Anya replied softly. "The Threxans have been the ruling power for centuries. They won't go down without a fight." Lucius turned to face her, his expression serious. "But we've already won, Anya. The galaxy is choosing us. The hegemony's reign is over, whether they accept it or not. We're building something better here, something that will last. This is just the beginning." Anya nodded, her heart swelling with both pride and apprehension. She had no illusions about the challenges ahead. The Threxans would never go quietly into the night. Their empire, once so vast and powerful, would fight tooth and nail to hold onto its remaining scraps of authority. But she knew, deep down, that Earth's way, this new, unorthodox way, was the future. The future of a galaxy that had grown tired of being ruled by fear. The Galactic Assembly Hall was packed, every seat filled with representatives from systems that had once been considered too insignificant, too isolated to matter. Now, they were all here, in the heart of Earth's new order, ready to forge a new path forward. Anya stepped onto the stage, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. There were faces from every corner of the galaxy, species that had once been at war, now sitting side by side. A few of the old Threxan governors were still present, but their expressions were hollow, resigned. They had lost their power, and they knew it. The galaxy has changed, Anya began, her voice echoing in the vast hall. For centuries, the Threxan hegemony ruled through strength, through fear, through control. They built an empire that spanned the stars, but in doing so, they forgot something. They forgot that true power lies not in domination, but in connection, in cooperation, in understanding. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. Anya's words were bold, but they were not spoken with arrogance. They were spoken with the certainty of someone who had seen the truth of it, who had felt the weight of it in every handshake, every treaty, every agreement forged between species that had once been divided by war, distrust, and isolation. The future of the galaxy is not built on a single empire or a single species. It is built on the cooperation of all of us, working together, learning from each other, and building a future where every voice is heard, every culture respected. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. It was a revolutionary idea, and yet it felt natural, like the galaxy had always been destined for something like this. We are no longer ruled by fear, Anya continued. The Threxan hegemony may still exist in name, but its power has already been eclipsed. The galaxy is ours now, not through force, but through choice. We have chosen to work together. We have chosen to be better. And together, we will build a future where no one is left behind. The room erupted in applause. The delegates rose to their feet, their faces alight with hope and conviction. The once unthinkable idea of a galaxy united without conquest, without oppression, had now become a reality. Back on the Threxan capital, Zirak watched the broadcast from Earth with a bitter, sinking feeling in her chest. The words that Anya Lee had spoken were a blow to everything the hegemony had stood for. The empire was in tatters, and there was no turning back. But Zirak wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The galaxy had been built on power, and power could still be reclaimed. Even if the old ways were fading, there would always be a place for strength, for control. She wasn't sure how or when, but she knew the hegemony wouldn't go quietly into the dark. There were still allies, still resources to draw from, still a chance to rebuild. But that would be a fight for another day. On Earth, in the heart of the newly formed Galactic Council, Anya Lee stood at the center of it all. The stars above her seemed brighter than ever before. The future of the galaxy was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in centuries, it was a future that belonged to everyone. And it was a future that Earth, the most unexpected of all forces, had helped to shape. The heart of the galaxy no longer beat in the cold, calculating chambers of the Threxan Empire. It now beat on Earth, a small, chaotic planet that had learned how to connect, how to adapt, and how to lead without control. And for the first time in history, the galaxy was alive with possibilities.